All right, hello, welcome everyone to what is this, March? March.
March Focus Friday, yeah.
What are 3 months we've had so far this year? All right, on the screen is just the housekeeping. Everybody's lines are muted. You are unable to talk yourself. If you have a question, ask it in the chat in the Q&A or the Q&A. Anything you want to add, Walt?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's just pretty straightforward. If you do have questions, you can always put the questions on the evaluation that will follow. And as you know, there's an evaluation that you will be prompted to link into after we're done. And please do link in. Give us your comments, give us your suggestions. We're always looking for that.
The next Focus Friday is on April 26th. It's not the third Friday, it's going to be the fourth one. And that's all my fault because I'm going to be cruising again.
Again.
What am I talking about? I'm going to be talking about FML, and I think we're going to try to get somebody to talk about relational efficiencies. So I'm getting that all ironed out. And so we'll update the agenda as soon as we know. But it's going to be on April 26th.
Nice background.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what I don't know. It was in the deck, the slide master, which I'm not quite sure. I didn't see it before, but it's kind of interesting. All right, so I'm going to talk about the MacGyver technique. So let's jump right in. Maybe. So we're going to talk about what it is, what you can do with it, how it works, and then see some examples. Now, for those of you who don't know, MacGyver is an 80s, early 90s TV show about a secret agent with a difference. Blah, 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 blah. Basically, he can do anything with a Swiss Army knife, gum wrapper, gum, paper clips, etc. Anything laying around, if he needs to make something or use it for a purpose, he has the knowledge. So that's the whole basis of the show. It was remade in 2016. It has since been canceled. You can watch it on the H&I channel, Heroes and Icons. So it's still there. In the FOCUS, WebFOCUS world, the MacGyver technique is a way to create complex reports just using defines and a define-based join by creating virtual, I'm putting it in quotes, versions of your input record. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you soon will. Richard Dean Anderson at one of his finest. Yes, I agree. And I also liked him in Stargate, which is also available through streaming. So what can you do with it? You can summarize the different levels in the same report, and we'll show an example of that. We're going to show you how to control a reporting application, controlling what you see in the report, and how you can transpose rows into columns and columns into rows and filling in gaps. Now, I'm not showing examples of all of this, but these are just some things that you can do. So how does it work? The MacGyver technique lets you create as many copies of your input data as you need. Now, these copies are virtual. So how does it do that? How do you create a virtual copy? Well, think of a virtual copy as a copy in memory. Okay. In order to do this, we establish a parent-child relationship. So if we look at the car file, in the car file, we have 5 countries and then 5 unique countries. But really, there are only 5 country values stored in the car file. Physically, there's only 5. And it's the parent of cars. And we have 10 different cars among those 5 countries. And for models, we have 18 models distributed across the 10 cars across the 5 countries. So if I do table file car print country, I only get 5 rows of output. Only 5, because physically there's only 5 values for the country. If I go and add car, now I get 10 rows. because I get a line for each country car combination. So I get England Jaguar, England Jensen, England Triumph. But remember, I said England physically only exists one time. So this is where that virtual duplication of your records is. Even though car is there several times, the country value is only there for the one value. So using this behavior, we can create a child record that then will duplicate information that we want to use in multiple ways. So we create a file that contains a join, and this join file will have the number of duplications that we want to achieve. Then you create a synonym that defines this file so that we can read it and join to it. Then in order to join to it, we need to do a defined base join because we're going to create a field that we're then going to join to this file. We're going to join at the parent level. That way, each of the occurs, which we're going to see when we talk about the synonym, we'll get the multiplicative effect. Then finally, we create the field we'll be joining with from the host. All right, so here's the synonym. Here I have file equals FOCUS MacGyver. In this case, the suffix is affix. Segment equals 1, segname, that's the segment name. And that's the parent that we're going to join that's going to have the multiplying of the children. So segment 2, notice it says parent equals 1 and occurs equals variable. So it could occur as many times as you need it. In this case, the field that we're going to define the multiple occurrences on is character 1, and it's only going to be one character. So if I have an 80-byte record, I can have up to 79 occurrences. Why 79 if it's an 80-byte record? Because the first one is the blank that we're joining on. Note this field counter has an alias of order. That alias of order is a special keyword which tells FOCUS, WebFOCUS, this field doesn't physically exist, but use it as a counter. So the first occurrence will be 1, the second occurrence will be 2, third, 3, etc. down the line. So it's like a subscript. The MacGyver file traditionally is called FSEQ. So if you're looking at somebody's code and you see a reference to FSEQ, it's probably using the MacGyver technique. The newer name for it is FOCMCGYV. But either one, it doesn't matter. You can call it George, no problem. All right, if you don't have the FSEQ master or a FOCMCGYV master, how do you create one? Well, you've got 3 ways. We ship one. Yes, we already include it for you, but it's hidden. You have to go find it and get it. It's in Home Catalog Folk Tools, and it's called FOCMCGYV.mas. And then you can just copy this to base app if you want to use it. You can app map to the catalog Folk Tools and then add it to your app path. Or you can create one dynamically using a file def and a -write, or you can create one dynamically using editput. Okay. If this is something you're always going to be using, you might want to consider having a physical one stored in base app. All right, so how do you create these? If you're using -write, here's your code. So I'm doing a file def to disk. Note that I don't have an app name in front of my FOC MCGYV.mas, which means it's going to go, anyone, in the edit temp. So it's going to go in your agent directory in your edit temp. So once your session is gone, then it's going to go away. Also notice we're doing a -close at the end because whenever you're doing a -write, the file will stay open at the end. Okay. If you're using editput, did I miss one? No, I got it. Did you have a question, Walt? Art has a
Arthur
question.
has raised his hand. He
Yes,
probably
Art, you can
has a
unmute
question.
yourself.
Or can he?
No, you can.
Okay, can we go back to the previous slide, please? Your file def is FOC MCGYV, but you're doing a write to FOC MCGYM. Is that correct?
Okay, that's that's a typo.
That is not correct.
Okay, just figured I'd make it clear.
Thank you.
No, that's a good point.
So what Art is saying that on this slide, I'm file defing to folk GYV, but I'm writing to GYM. So that's not going to fly because we didn't have a file def for GYM.
Right.
So the file def handle and the write handle have to match. Thank you, Art. Which is why you probably want to do editput, because you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
So this is the same procedure using editput. Editput is something specifically, well, it used to be specifically on the server. We have it in Focus now, as from the 7.7 versions and higher on mainframe Focus, we also can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So here you execute and tell it the number of lines, and then we say we're doing an editput. Then you have your application name, your file type. In this case, it's a hold mask or master. Either one will work. Comma, the name that you're going to call it, and then comma C. The C is for create, and then comma the word file because we're creating a file, a physical file. We could have put this in memory, and instead of doing file, we could have done mem, M-E-M. And then we have the entries that we saw before. And notice I just have a dash run here at the end. The number of lines goes from the execute to just before the dash run. So we include the execute line as part of the number. So 7, so execute 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then we're going to create the FTM file that has the number of occurrences we're going to be reporting against. So in this case, I'm file defing. In this case, I have the GYV, which is correct. And I'm writing to GYV, which is correct. I'm telling it it's a record format fixed, it's a fixed length, and it has a record length of six characters. I need to do the dash run because the file def by itself doesn't run immediately. It goes into the stack because there's no dash in front of it. It's not a dialog manager command. So once it's on the stack, I have to dash run it to have it applied, and then I can do a dash write to it. So if I just ran it without the dash run, I would get an error saying that the file wasn't allocated. I'm going to dash write to the file, and I have space, and then 5 X's. And the 5 X's are representing the 5 occurrences. Okay, it's a little hard when you do the space for your for the file that the field you're going to join on. So we'll just show you another way later on where you can use something else. The LRECL should be always one more than the number of occurrences you need. And in this case, the first character is blank. And that's just pointing that out again.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so then we put it all together. We've got our creating the master, creating the file. And in this case, the execute, so hold mask GYV is correct. And then the folk MGYV for the data is also correct. Because the hold mask dataset type in the editput is going to put a .mas at the extension. And then the other file is going to have a .ftm. So one is the master and one is the data. Okay. And then let's see what happens once we do this. Table file folk mcgyv print star, and we get blank, and we see 5 character ones, and then we see the counter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the order field. So physically in this file, I have 1 blank and I have 5 characters. So now, how do we make this into, how do we get the magic to happen? Any record that we now join to this file will get replicated 5 times, 1 for each of the counters, 1 for each of the characters, 1 for each of the children of the MacGyver file. So how do we do this join? Well, we're going to do a define-based join. So we're going to do join blank with country. The with country says the blank field doesn't exist yet, but look for it coming, and then we'll see a define. So join blank with country and car to blank in FOC MCGYV as J1, define file car blank / A1 with country equals blank. Table file car, print country, and then I'm going to print the segment that contains counter, which is going to be the counter and the character 1. And that's what I get. So now we see England 5 times, we see Japan 5 times. We're going to see all of the countries now 5 times. And that's where the magic happens. That's where the virtualization of your record comes in. All right, so what can we do with this now that we know the secret? So in our first example, I have 2 reports. One is doing a sum of dollars, sales dollars and budgeted dollars by category by product. The second one has the same thing, but it's only by product. I want to take these and I want to have one report follow the other. Now, if you're an App Studio person, you could say, oh, well, I can easily do that with a compound report. Absolutely, no problem. You could probably do it with a compound report in Designer. Fine, no problem. But if you do a compound report, you're writing 2 physical reports, report 1, report 2. So if you're writing millions of records and millions of records, each one's going to take time. I want to do this in 1 pass of the data. Ooh. For those of you who don't remember Noreen Redden, that was always the thing that got me with her when we go to presentations that she would give. I can do it in 1 pass of the data. So it was always a challenge. All right. So how do we do this using MacGyver? This is what our output wants to look like. Okay, we want one following the other. So we have to look at it and kind of analyze the reports and say, are these common? What's different about them? Because we're trying to visualize if we can sectionalize each of these reports, because that's the part of the MacGyver. We have duplicates of data, so I want to section it into section 1, section 2, maybe a third. So the only difference between the 2 reports is the first one has category and the second one doesn't. There's an extra by field. So we can break it up into section 1, section 2. And then we can create a virtual by field and define that says if I'm in section 1, use category. If I'm in section 2, don't use anything. Make it blank. Okay. So we create the MacGyver synonym. Here I'm doing execute dash lines, 7, edit put. I'm using the same name. Segment 1, seg name equals 1. Field blank. So all that looks the same. File def. In my file def, I have disk, and then I have my FTM file. I'll record list 3 because I only want 2 occurrences. And I'm doing a write x12. So for those of you other than Art that already has his hand up, hold on, Art. Anybody see anything different in what we're doing here? Okay, Art, you may unmute. Or is your hand still up from before? Art?
Sorry, I was muted and I had to unmute myself. Just as a comment, you'll
Okay.
notice the second line we put out has several blanks before the word file. The reason we did that is instead of creating a separate data file, we just point back to the master.
So,
So
all right,
basically, we're using the data file, the master file, as the data file.
Right.
so what Art's saying is, as long as you're any file that has a blank in the first character, if you're using blank, can be used not as the MacGyver file. So if in your master you had a blank on the first character, then you can use your master as your MacGyver file. But then just keep in mind, you're going to have a number of occurrences all the way out to whatever number of characters are in your synonym.
Right. That's where you have to watch order and be cognizant, because order is what you're going to use to control it.
Yeah, and you can always put a where statement to say where the order is less than or equal to the number that you need.
Right.
Yeah, I meant to bring that up, which is why I keep this in here, because you might see this in old code. All right, so where was I? All right, so what's different? Notice on my dash right, I'm not writing blank 1, 2, I'm writing x1, 2.
Mhm.
So just like the name of the MacGyver file doesn't really matter as long as everything's consistent, the value that you join on doesn't have to be a blank as long as you're consistent. So here I'm using x this time. So when I create my join blank x with product in GG sales to blank in FOCUS MacGyver, define file GG sales, blank x, A1 with product. Instead of equaling blank, it's equal to x this time, because I need to join on that first character. Blank field is an A1 with product is going to be a blank. By 1 is an A11, and if the counter is 1, then it's going to be the category, because our first column in the first section we want to see by category. Otherwise, we're going to see by blank. All right. So table file, here's our code. We have by counter, by blank field, and by 1. So the by counter separates the sections, and notice it's no printed. By blank field probably isn't needed in this case, but it's used to control the total. Oh, it's used to control the total line, because I'm doing a on table no total, and I'm doing an on blank field subtotal. So I want to see the subtotal, but I want to see it between the counter 1, counter 2. And I don't want to see any values. If I said subtotal on counter subtotal, I would see the 1 and the 2 values. By doing it on blank field, the blank field is going to still show, but the value is blank. And then by 1 would be category for 1, section 1, and blank for counter of 2. And our output looks like 1 report, one flow of the data, one request, one table request, but I have 2 different reports at different summary levels. All right. In this example, I have a report that's by country across body type, and I have another report that's across or by country across car. I want these in one report. How do you ask? Like this. But I don't want them separate like that with the 2 countries, because again, you could probably do this with a compound report. No, I want it like this, where they're kind of smushed up against each other. So can I do this with MacGyver? Well, let's see. Sections, can anybody see sections? Well, body type would be a section 1, it looks like, and car would be a section 2. Okay. So we create the MacGyver file. I went back to using the blank and the XX. Again, we only have 2 occurrences that we need, 2 sections. So I'm going to do 3. Notice I didn't indent file this time, because for the way we're doing it with the file def, we're not using the file itself as the MacGyver file. So we don't need the blank there. We do our define base join blank with sales, and we're saying across value 1. If counter is 1, then I want body type. Notice body type is in tick marks. What does that mean? It's a literal. So if the counter is 1, I'm giving it the literal value of body type, otherwise the literal value of car. And I'm using this as the column heading. And then the cross value 2, if the counter is 1, it's going to have the body type value. Otherwise, it's going to have the car value. Now, the caveat with this is body type and car need to be similar data types. So car is an A16, and body type, I'm not sure what that is. But as long as it's less than, in this case, 25, where I say across value 2 / A25, I'm saying the maximum can be 25 characters. As long as the value for body type and the value for car is going to be less than that, then we're good. Don't start mixing alphas and numerics, because then you might have some problems unless you convert them to the proper format. Yes, Art?
Real quick question. Across value 1, since you only have 2 literals, body type and car, it really only needs to be an A8. Is that true?
That is true, yes. Good point. Does everybody get that? He's saying that since body type is the biggest of the 2 literal values, my across value 1 only really needed to be an A8. Absolutely. So those of you who are wondering who this guy is who's interjecting and is allowed to speak, this is Art Greenhouse, and Art and Noreen, that I've already mentioned, are the original book wizards. And I want to say, Art, your ID back in the IBI days was 5 or something like that?
10.
10.
So he's been around since the beginnings of IBI even. So he likes to come in and join us and keep up with what we're doing and rattle our chains every once in a while.
He's a kibitzer.
But it's good. All right, so let's bring it all together. What was that?
You can always mute me if it's a problem.
I could. So it's interesting because there's an option to say remove permission to talk. All right, so bringing it all together. Table file car, sum sales by country, across counter. And again, let me bring up the notes. The across counter is to separate the sections. The across value 1 is to display the headings. And the across value 2 will show you the values for body type or car. And we get this report. Again, 1 pass at the data. Ooh, ah. All right, last example. This is controlling what you're totaling. So I'm doing subtotals or totals at different with different criteria. So in this case, my report looks like I have something units, because I looked at the cheated and looked at the code. Some units by country across seats. So if I add up the total, everything adds up. But what if I only wanted to see the total values for Japan and West Germany? How could I do that? Can I do that? So we want it to look like this. I want the total now to be only 86 for seats 4 and 79 for seats 5. Again, can we make this into sections? Section 1, by value country. Section 2 is going to be a total, but only when we have Japan and West Germany. Okay, how do we actually do this? Again, create our file. We're writing, I'm doing blank again, XX. Here's my define. So my by value says if counter is 1, then the value is going to be country. And then for the counter 2, I only care about Germany, Japan and Germany. So when the country is Japan or West Germany, then I'm going to put this into a category called total. And total is what's going to be picked up in that section 2, counter 2. The sum value is if the counter equals 1, then units, because I'm picking up all of them. But else, if the country is Japan or West Germany, because now the counter is 2, then it's going to be units, but it's only going to be units when those 2 values meet the criteria. Otherwise, it's going to be 0. So again, by counter separates. By country, if it's 1, it's going to be the value country. Otherwise, for 2, it's going to be the value total. And then I added a where condition that says where by value is not equal to blank. And this eliminates the non-Japan West Germany rows. Otherwise, I will have blank rows showing in the report, but I don't physically want to see them. And this is what I get. So you could do as many total lines as you really wanted to. I want to get a total of every even row. I want to get a total of every odd row. All of that is now doable through one pass of the data. So that's all I have. So MacGyver, it's powerful, and people look at it and they start getting dizzy. So hopefully this made the what's going on a little more understandable. And hopefully there's something in here that you think you can use. So let me know if there's any questions.
There's a question from Art.
Art?
Art?
Well, I could say something, but it's not so much a question. Actually, one of the original reasons for the MacGyver technique was a hotel reservation system where you have a person, you have their check-in date and their check-out date. So you only have one record. But what you want to do is calculate how much the stay costs, but the rates are different every day. So you created a calendar file that you join to, and if the date in the calendar file is within the range of the dates of the stay, you include that record, otherwise you don't. And that way you could basically say, here's how much the total stay costs, even when the dates change or the rates change.
Absolutely.
Cool. Cool.
So in the past, I was asked, because I'm using fixed files, is there a way to do this with relational? Because if you're dealing with, say, Oracle tables, you don't want to join an Oracle table to a fixed file because you're going to lose optimization. So there is a way to do it instead of having the fix. You can do it with an SQL Aura, DB2, whatever relational database that you're using. But instead of doing a dash write in order to create the file, you're going to have to insert the records into your relational table that you're joining on. So it's doable. There's a little more work behind the scenes, but it makes your queries a lot more optimized. So bringing that up, when you join in the SQL, when you join it one table to 2 tables, what happens if I don't have a where condition? I get a Cartesian product. Every record in the host is matched to every record in the cross-reference. That's technically what the MacGyver technique is, except I called it a controlled Cartesian. Because we're saying we only have two values that at most that we're going to be able to join on. So, and that's where the duplication comes in. So you're creating a Cartesian, but it's controlled. Rory, thank you. All right, I'm done. I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
I'm going to just mute you. And all right, I'm going to stop sharing. And Mr. Blood, if you can take
All right, I will pick up. I'm going to share my screen.
And I see Hannah joined us.
Yeah, Hannah joined us. Share my screen. And which one do I want to share? I want to share. Oh, let me do this the right. I'm going to pick up 2. I think that's what's going to go. And share that. Start my presentation. All is well. Life will be good. And there it is. All right. Well, today I'm going to go back and I'm going to do another introduction to the wonderful world of modify. For those of you who are familiar with the language, FOCUS actually includes a wealth of material. You can not only do reporting from it, you can also do transaction processing from it. There analytics are built into the language if you want to do statistics. You can see the functionality that we have with join. We also have a merging functionality called match. There's an enormous amount of functionality in the language, and one of those functionalities is called modify. And modify basically allows us to work with data one record at a time. So let's dive in. Modify has been around for a long time. And basically this is this is what we use to load FOCUS databases initially. There are other ways you can do that, but modify has been expanded and you can use modify with a lot of other data types as well, including fixed files and all of our relational tables. As you can see, it covers a wide range of the kinds of functionality that it may need. It's easy and quick to build. There is a modify talk functionality that's available on the mainframe, and that actually will automatically build a modify for you based upon a master file that you hand it. It can be run batch or standalone, so it's standalone. You can deal with a few records or with millions of records. It really doesn't care. It has a conversational front end to it. It's called CRT form, which will allow you to actually interact with the modify as it's working, so you can input data. And it's very powerful. So it has a big, wide range. It's been around for a long time. Initially, we used to use it with whole format FOCUS. Up until 7.6, we used whole format FOCUS was basically a table request followed by a modify. Table request to dump the data that you wanted, and a modify to load it into the whole format, the FOCUS file that you want to use. Let's take a look at the basic components inside of a modify procedure. The first thing we have to do inside of modify is identify the file we're going to work with. And this is the same with almost all of the FOCUS languages. The higher level functions, modify, table, table F, match, analyze, all have to identify a file to work with. And that's what this statement says. It says modify file and points to a file. Then we have to the idea then basically is to work with the data one transaction at a time. All right. And in that, what we're going to do for each transaction is typically we're going to read the data. We're going to read a transaction. We're going to follow that by validating some transactional information, and you can do as much of this as you need to. You may need to calculate other values to use in the transaction, and that's done with a compute. And finally, we're going to go out to the database and we're going to look for something. We're going to look for a record that we can use based upon the information that we've just pulled in. The data that we got in the transaction, the validation and the calculation, the compute. And you can see that we've got two things that we can do. We can match on something, or we can don't match on something. We can specify actions for either one or both. Now, we'll take action based upon what we see here. And finally, if we don't get it, if we're not at the end of the file, we're going to go back to the top. Okay, top is an unstated case, and I'll tell you about those in a little bit. But we're going to go back to the top of the process and continue with the next transaction. So as long as we have data in that input file, we're going to be reading. We're going to be continuing to process transactions. Now, once we've got that, we also have to point in the process as to where the physical transactions are. Where's my data? And that's with the data on statement. And ultimately, we have to have an end statement. The end statement basically tells me where I'm done. Now, when we're working with this, when you run a modify, the entire modify is going to be parsed before anything happens, right? And that end statement basically tells us when our parsing can stop and we can start to take a look at actually turning around and running. All right. Now let's take a look at the individual thing. The identify, looking at the modify, which file am I going to use? Okay. What am I going to do? I'm going to read the master file. That's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to open up the master file to make sure I know what this is. That's also going to tell me what kind of a database I'm working with, whether it's FOCUS or XFOCUS. If I need a new file, I can use create file, another functionality in the FOCUS language that also can be used with other data types as well. If there's an access file, which basically says that I may have more than one partition in this database, I'm going to only use the first partition I see with modified. That's all we see, all right? When you use table and you have an access file built and you have multiple partitions, we see all of the partitions. With modify, you do not. Only see the first one. So if you're working with something like that, you're going to need to make sure that you know which partition you're actually working with, all right? If it's a non-focus structure, obviously, we're going to have the write capability inside of the product. We have to tell ourselves that, yes, indeed, write is possible for this. And I need a read-write adapter to be able to do this. I can't do this with an adapter that's only set up for read-only, right? I have the ability to update or to use modify against data files that are on my system, i.e. locally, or I can use it against a sync machine, which is actually something that is going to set up to allow multiple users to update the same file at the same time. You're going to need to check security, but obviously on the update permission to be able to do that. All right. The next step, reading a transaction from the file or from the screen. We're going to gather data. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have some kind of a statement that tells me where my data is going to be coming from. A fixed form statement basically says, I've got a file out there and it's a fixed form. This is the format of the file and it specifies the format, field/format. You give it a name, you give it a format, and we basically just map the data file that we're going to be reading. You can also fix form from a master file, right? And you have the ability to use CRT form, which is our conversational stuff. You can actually define a screen-based line that will basically grab data. You'll see that there are a number of types of text I've shown here. You've got the text with the no D dot or T dot. D dot and T dot basically give us the ability to look at data that's in display only. The D dot is display only. I'm not going to change this data. I'm going to display it only. The no caret with no D dot or T dot is basically, this is an open field. Put data in here. The T dot basically says, okay, I'm going to get data from the data file and I'm going to send data back to it. So if I want to update that field, it's going to have to be a T dot. I can also use freeform. Freeform basically is going to be a freeform statement is going to use some sort of a delimiter to delimit the fields. So we don't really care about the lengths. We care about just the order of the fields. And typically those are commas. They can also be blanks. And finally, we have prompt.
Cool.
Yeah.
Art has a question.
Well, let me finish this. Okay, go ahead, Arthur. What's your comment? Arthur?
Somehow he got out.
Asked on mute.
Okay, the fixed form, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The fixed form has to describe the entire record.
That's
so
correct.
If there are fields you have to skip over, you have to allow a temporary field to take that space. Or if there's a temporary field that you're going to use to calculate another field, you have to define that temporary field as well. And that's done with the compute before the fixed form, so we know how to read those fields in.
That's correct. That's right. Effectively, and you can have multiple fixed form lines. You don't have to describe the record in one line. It can be described in multiple lines. All right.
Although, as we found out, keep them together.
Yes, you do have to keep them together. If you try to break them up with something else, the fixed form, it's going to be problematic. So if you have computes, if you have defined, in effect, computed fields, virtual fields that you want to work with here, you have to put them, you have to do that before you start the fixed form. All right. Okay. All right. I think that, let's see. Now, here's a simple example. One of the things that you typically can do with, especially with fixed form, is to basically create a hold file, which will automatically create a master file for you, and then use the fixed form from hold. And this is a very common technique where you literally build a transaction file from a table request and then go right into the modify and do the fixed form from hold, which means you don't have to describe all of the data in the record using the fixed form statement. Use the fixed form from. This simplifies life greatly. Now, it's very similar to, in a way, to the dash read file functionalities available in Dialog Manager, which allows us to use the master file in Dialog Manager to actually read a record from a file by using the master file information. All right. All right. Validate. Validate gives us the ability to actually test the values to make sure they're okay. All right. That's something that we do want to be able to do. Before a validate occurs, we're going to be looking at the field format, right? So we're going to check and make sure that the usage okay. If I send in an ABC and I'm trying to put it into a field that's set up as a P10, it's going to kick out with an error, all right? Automatically, all right? That's part of the functionality that we provide based on the master file. In the modify, you're adding additional functionality with the validate command. You can also use this will also be validated based upon the accept that is included in the master file, right? The validate basically is a simple expression. It's like a compute. It's always an I1 because it's basically going to be a true false. This is a Boolean. And any expression that will evaluate to a Boolean is something that you can use here. If it comes out as equal to 0, the transaction is going to be considered invalid and is going to be rejected. If it's not equal to 0, transaction is accepted, it's valid, and we will continue on processing. You need to test on invalid with a goto to determine what to do if the data value is invalid. All right, that's the one thing you do need to do. Computes. If you need intermediate values, this is where you're going to build them using computes. All right, and effectively, it's like computes in table. It's any expression that you can do. If you use a D dot field on the right side, effectively, you're basically indicating that you want to pull that data value out of the database. Okay, rather than using a transaction value that you might pick up from either the fixed form file or from the conversational screen, and that's how you differentiate them, right? Yeah. One thing you do need to do is you need to make sure that you have space available for all of the data values that are going to be, all of the fields and the data values you're going to be working with. So you need to compute field format equals semicolon for the fields that do not have an initial value. You need to set something up here to make sure that things are covered. If it's in a master file, you don't need to worry about it. If it's not in a master file, you need to give it effectively initialize it before you go. Now, compute can also be used within the on-match and on-no-match statements, which is kind of interesting because it allows you now to add, if you can have different behaviors depending upon whether you've got a data value matching or not. Very, very useful. All right. Finally, we get to our match. All right, and this is one of the things that we can do. We're going to go look for a transaction value in the database, effectively what we're saying. Go match my key field, my field, in the database. And it doesn't have to be one value. It can be multiple values. Actually, it can be all values if you want. You've got lots of flexibility there. And we're going to go find the values that we're looking for, the records with those values. We will scan the records sequentially, or we'll use an index to do this, depending upon the data, but depending on what we have. If we use a match star, we're going to match all of the fields. And as the thing is, I note here, that's expensive. So you don't necessarily want to do that. Match star keys will match all key fields. And when you're dealing with a hierarchy with multiple key fields and multiple segments, this is not a bad idea because it pulls all the this pulls all the important fields in, all those keys in at the same time. You also have something called next. And next isn't so much a match. Next is going to allow you to walk through the database one record at a time. And this can be very useful, especially if you want to just match in a certain segment. You're at a high level segment, you match down to a segment down to a specific value, and then you want to basically get all the children from that. And you can literally next through those, which is very useful. This also allows you to write your own selection or decision logic next. Very useful. To get back, when you're working with match, if the next time it hits match, it's going to go right back to the top and start over again. With next, you're going to have to reposition the field because next basically goes and gets the next field. So if you want to go back to the top or go back to the beginning of the segment or right before the segment, this reposition the field is going to set it right before the first record in the chain at that segment level. All right. On match, on no match, this is what we're effectively, when we go at these values, we're going to do one of two things. We're going to match it or no match it, or next or no next. We have some kind of an action. What are those actions? Well, we can do quite a bit at this point. We can include, which is add a record. We can delete, update. We can type out something, and we can type it out to the screen. We can type it out to a DD name. We can compute at that point. We can issue a repeat. We can do a perform or a go to, which basically allows me in case logic to go someplace else and then either go there and stay there or go there and come back. Perform, go there and come back, go to, go there and stay there. I can validate at this point. I can use an if test at this point. I can also reject the record, and I can activate, which basically tells me to activate all the computed fields in this particular record. All right. All right. There's also something called deactivate, which is probably also available here. With an on no, how do I, when I have an on no next, that indicates that there are no more records in the chain at this particular level, and it tells me what to do under those circumstances. Okay. This is a way that you can actually control what, okay, when I've finished it, when I've gotten to the end of my chain, what do I do? Well, that's on no next. All right, I can, my source, my data source for these records is going to be indicated in the data file, in the data statement. Data, if I just use data by itself, it's going to be taking data from the terminal or from sysn or from online, all right? In order to end the modify, regardless of how we do it, you've got to have an end command. And you can, if you're using data, you're not going to include the end statement in your request because it will immediately end with doing nothing. You have to input the end statement at that particular point, right? The end is effectively going to end the transaction. And I can also use data on DD name. Okay, that's a file. I have to have a file allocated one way or another. I can go there and read that file. That's how I point to it. I can have a file def. I can use a DD name that's been allocated. I can also use data via Fidel. Data via Fidel is gathered from our CRT form display. There are other data vias, including data via edit. There's also a data via program name. You have the ability to actually, if you want to, actually write your own program to create the transaction. And that could be something that would be associated with COBOL or with Kix. You have the ability to do that. Now, under the covers, this all looks like fixed form. So even a third-party program, a 3GL program is going to have to treat it as if this is a fixed form setup. But the logic is all controlled by the program that you might write or might have. Okay. Now, when I get to the end statement, what do? It's got to be the last line of the modify. It is the way you get out of or end a conversational transaction in CRT form. We will do an automatic commit at the end of each transaction. Okay, you can use check to save a certain number of transactions after a certain number. Now, why are we talking about it? Well, Focus works in basically works in memory, and it's going to save a lot of data in something we used to call bins. We still call it bins. It's effectively one bin or one record to storage each of the segments I'm going to be working with in a given file. And we will store data, and we will write data out. We will store data there. We won't actually flush it out to the database until we hit either a commit statement or a check. Check will automatically write that data out. And if you've got an enormous amount of data going in, you probably want to set some kind of a check in there to make sure the data gets out there on a regular basis. You can also use commit and rollback. Now, modify precedes commit and rollback inside of SQL. So this is the kind of the modify is an slightly older technology. Commit and rollback actually is much more sophisticated. It actually allows you to define a logical unit of work. It's typical of what you find in SQL, and it can be used. We do support that. Modify can be tiny. Modify can also be huge. It can have thousands and thousands of lines. We have some modifies out there upwards of 40,000 lines, which is an enormous amount of code, Focus code. Remember, Focus is basically interpreted, so a lot of work can be condensed down to a single command, and that's exactly what happens. So 40,000 lines is a lot. Now, if you think about it, you can have a simple table request that's three lines or 4 lines long, and the amount of work that's actually going on in the system underneath that is huge. All right, and this is the idea behind the 4GL, which is where Focus actually is. It's a language that basically compresses that sort of stuff. Now let's talk a little bit about the input and output controls that you have. Input controls. Well, this is really the conversational stuff that we have. We have fixed form, and fixed form is going to input an alpha, right? And it's going to have to be alpha. It doesn't like binary data, all right? Free form. And notice that if I've got a free form, I've got it set up so that you can have commas between things, and you can even use key value pairs, and that's perfectly okay. We will accept that. CRT form, build a screen and basically collect the data from the screen, prompt, and you can also use TED, interestingly enough. You can use TED as an input mechanism to bring in unstructured data, and that's very useful. It will go into the TX format inside the Focus database, into a flat file for that matter. Your output controls effectively are CRT form. I can display using CRT form. Inside of modify, I can also use display. I can display using type on or type on, depending on where I want to go. Case logic. The powerful part about modify is that it allows you to take a request or take a transaction and cut it up into as many pieces as you need. And you basically control the flow through those cases, so that if you have complex logic such that the data that the operation on the data needs to be different based upon the data that's being read, you can do that very easily in case logic, and you can create cases for any of the possibilities that are required, and literally use goto or perform to be able to move to the case that's appropriate. Obviously, you've got compute to be able to test for that. The way case logic works is we have a case at start. Case at start, regardless of where it exists, is going to be the first thing that's run, and it will only be run once. And typically this is used to set up whatever you need to run. If you've got allocations that need to be done in order to run this particular modify, you can stick them into the case at start, and it'll pick that up and take care of it. If you need initializations that need to be done with computes, you can stick it there and have that done. As I said before, top case is an implied top. All right, you can always go to top, and effectively that will take you to the beginning. You'll see that there are otherwise the cases just are gonna fall through one to the next. All right, you have go to be able to jump around, and you also have perform. Now, the control of those cases, I can have a case name, and that basically tells me what the case is, and I have to end a case with end case. I have to know where the case stops. All right, and that's done with an end case statement. I can perform a case name, which basically says go to that case and then come back. I have a perform. Go to case name is go there and don't come back, or don't come back unless go where you're told to go. I can use an if expression to conditionalize both perform and go to. So I have a lot of function. I have a lot of plastic. This is very flexible. Okay, go to. I can from case A, I can go to B, but I can't go back. That's not automatic. If I want to go back, I have to specify that. With perform, I don't have to specify it. It's automatically going to go back to where it came from. And that's very useful. Simple little case here. In the first case, I'm going to execute B. Case A is done. When I go to B, I'm not going to come back to A, at least based on this. All right. If I execute in B, I'm going to perform C. Okay. B is going to be suspended effectively. I'm going to do C, and then I'm going to go back to B eventually, because I may actually have something down here that's going to change the logic. All right. And you have to be a little careful about that. You can get crazy with this. All right. It's entirely possible. But the point is, you have total control of how you're processing the transaction. All right. Now, interestingly enough, this can also be used for reporting, and it's somewhat slower because you're working one record at a time, but it allows you to effectively treat every data record individually, which is not the way table normally works. If you need that, you can use modified to actually create that. Now, obviously here, I have something called repeat, and repeat allows me to loop. All right, and I can do things multiple times, so that I don't have to get crazy trying to specify that. I can repeat it n times. I can have a maximum. I can actually put a no hold on it. I have an end repeat statement, which basically tells me where the repeat stops, because repeat says go to repeat. All right, go to exit repeat is a little bit different. All right, exit repeat basically says jump out of, go to the next line after the end repeat. All right. I also have a go to end repeat, which says go to the end repeat, which is going to stay in the repeat, but it's going to jump over whatever processing you had between where you are and the end of the repeat. So you will repeat if you need to at that point. Where you also have in modify something called the scratchpad area, or the SPA. And the SPA is effectively memory that we're going to allow you to work with to hold data and process it. So I can actually work with multiple records at the same time, which is really kind of cool. The hold, you can basically pull data out, put it into the SPA using the hold command, and you can give it a field list for what you actually want to hold over there. You can identify scratchpad fields by the field number or the D-dot field number, either way. You can do a get hold, which says get the stuff that's over in hold. And you can also do a sort hold, which says sort the stuff that's in hold, because you may actually want to change the order of what's in that hold area before you actually get it, because that may change the sequence. The sequences may be what you need to change. You automatically get a hold count when you're working with this. All right, there will be a count on the hold as well as a hold index. Now, repeat n can be an asterisk, all right, which effectively means repeat forever, all right, which means it's really important if you're going to play with this one that you have an exit repeat or an exit repeat laid out, because otherwise you may just go into an infinite loop. Simple case, I've got a repeat in this, and I set n equals 1, and I'm going to repeat the next couple of lines from repeat to the end, repeat 5 times. You'll see that I'm going to compute n, and n is equal to n plus 1, so I'm adding 1 to that. Then I'm going to type that out. And then I'm going to go to an if n is greater than or equal to 4, then go to exit repeat, which means exit the repeat, at which point I'm going to type n out again. All right. Exit repeat does not have a label because it's just going to the end. It's going right past the end of the repeat. Now, any idea what the last n is going to be? How many n's are going to actually show here? Any ideas? Art? Okay, when I come in here, my first compute is going to turn 1 into 2. All right. 2 will go to 3, 3 will go to 4. This is the third one. On the fourth one, I'm going to go to exit repeat. All right. Okay, so I've actually repeated 3 times. All right. At that point, I'm going to type out n equals what? On the third one, 4, I will have added 4. 4 will have been turned into 5. So I'll be sitting there with n equals 5, although I've only repeated 3 times. Okay. Repeat can be very powerful, especially if you've got something that needs to be done over and over again. It makes life a lot simpler. All right, what kind of transaction level and file level controls do I have? Got commit and rollback, which effectively allows me to control when things get written to the disk. I've got activate and deactivate, which allows me to determine which fields are going to be used in any transaction at any particular time. When I activate a field, it's going to be used. When I deactivate the field, it's not going to be used. It's going to be ignored. All right. I also have some basic preferences. I have a check, which would basically allow me to, I can turn off the intermediate notifications. I have a start and stop so that if you're working with a batch job that's got to process, say, 100,000 rows, and for some reason the transaction file gets messed up at 52,678, you can start at 52,679 very easily by just using the start. All right. If you only need to process a certain number of them, the top or the end, you can literally use start and stop to indicate which elements in your data input file you actually need to use. And you can log pretty much everything. You can log your accepts, which are effectively the things that are going into the database, the duplicates, the no matches, the invalids, the formats. You can turn message on and off so that you can either see messages or not see messages. And that's basically it. That's a introduction to Modify. There's doc on Modify. So if you're interested in using it, take a look at it. There is, as I said before, if you're working in a mainframe or you have access to the mainframe, there's a Modify talk functionality that will actually build your Modify for you based upon the master file that you actually have. And that can be a great place to start from because it will give you a perfect Modify. If overly complicated, it will make sure that every base is covered with Modify. Good place to start, good place to learn. Any questions? No questions. All right.
No, Barry put in 6. I was wondering what the 6 was for, but I guess it was for your question of how many ends.
Oh, it's actually not going to make it that far.
So here's a question, has nothing to do with what we've talked about. Any chance of getting an updated error code doc? Probably not.
If you want error code, this is the files that the errors are stored in are documented. They're typically F something, and OT, FON. It's a bunch of files. Those are flat files and they are structured. They're very easy to read. It shouldn't be. It doesn't take You can take a look at it. It'll actually give you the number, the one-liner that we put out, typically up to 4 lines of comments that we put. You can actually write a table request to read those files and spit those out, right? And
Yeah, we
that's
have a function that will give you the error
fix error.
message
Yeah, fix error.
based on the error number.
Mhm.
And I have a routine. I got to see if I can find it. So Brad, if you want to put that on the evaluation, I'll let you know either I couldn't find it or if I found it, I'll shoot it out to you.
Cool. All right. All right. In fix form, oh, that's, yeah, you can use, skip one, right. All right.
So Brad, what my procedure will do is it'll allow you to create a PDF.
Yeah. And actually that request is not new. That request has come many times since we stopped publishing the error messages. The error messages do change. And that's one of the things that we have to be a little careful about. We try not to change the basic ones, because if you actually use an error, if you test for an error message, which you can do inside of any of our processing and dialog manager, you can test for error messages, test for the data value that's in the error message to determine what you want to do. We try not to change the basic ones, but it's good to know, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, problem is there are now upwards of 50,000 different messages, so it's like, or at least room for 50. There's a huge number of error messages, and that as we broadened our adapter space, the number of error messages went up like a skyrocket. So each of the adapters effectively has its own set of error messages. All right.
There's a note in the chat for you from Lori.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Yes, I am retiring. And so it's been fun.
And you'll be missed.
Yep. Well, I won't be good. If I'll be out there, I'm going to turn into like Art. I'll turn into a curmudgeon. That's what I'll do. All right. I guess. All right. Very good.
When will Dialog Manager have dash readline commit? Readline? We have that, right?
Read
file. We have read file.
We have dash read file. Right. And
What I guess, Barry, I don't understand what you mean by read line.
you want to read just the line? Dash read line. Just the read.
So just give it the full length of the record.
Right. Yeah, you can read the entire line by giving it the maximum size, and it'll read that. Now, be careful. Yeah. So, yeah. And yeah, dash read file actually uses the master file to read it. So if you want to pick out a specific piece of that line, it's very easy to use that. If you don't know the master size beforehand, make it huge. I mean, if you give it a very large dash read, if you, let's see, you don't know, because if you're in WebFOCUS, the line is it 32K or is it bigger than that now?
Well, if it's a stream, then you have the problem, because then you
Right.
could pick up stuff from the next line.
That's correct. If it's a stream. If it's a fix, then you can deal with it very easily. We'll skip transactions. Yes. Yes, yeah, that's one of the problems with dash read. All right. If you, is there a way to, because with dash read file, you have to specify the fields that you want. And that can be problematic, because if you, how do you, specifying all of the field names, does And I don't know whether seg dot.
But you always get all the field names.
Well, no, but if you want it, if you do a dash read file, you'll get all of the. It's going to give you all of them
You
in
get all the
individual
components.
all of them
Yeah.
in individual amper variables, right?
Right.
Now, if you wanted to go into a single amper variable,
You'd have to concatenate them all back together.
yeah, and that can be problematic. So a read line, interesting. I mean, in a fixed world for a fixed file with a fixed format, it's the record. So that shouldn't be too complicated. And you might actually be able to get the record length, even if it's variable, because a variable is going to have a max size, and you have to play with the max size. But if it's a fixed format, effectively, you're okay. If it's a stream, if it's truly a stream, then it's a lot more complicated. And in which case, that's a good question. I'll leave that one to you, Walter.
I'm gonna do some more research.
Yeah. You have a text file being sent that varies in length. A text file that varies in length. You know what? You probably need to treat that as either a blob or a clob.
Or file depth with a VB.
I would take a look at as a clob, because then it's going to read the entire clob record, and it's basically a record. A clob basically goes from the beginning to the end. It doesn't
But he
know.
doesn't want that. He wants each individual record.
Right. So each record in your clob, in other words, if I have, well, okay, you're right. If the text records are being sent in text file that varies in length.
Barry, open a case.
Yeah,
Open
that's a good
case
question.
and say that you brought this up at Focus Friday and to have it sent to Walter Bringle.
Yeah.
And I'll take a look and see if there's anything we can do.
Yeah.
Because at worst, maybe we could do it as a club, but then treat it as the limited file with the carriage return line feed as the limiter.
That's not a bad idea. Yep, that's correct. Possible.
But then that wouldn't be dash read though. That would be, you'd have to do some sort of table. But yeah, we'll figure it out. All right.
Right.
That's all the QA. There's a bunch of congratulations.
Well, thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Art, the issue is, how do I dash read and get a whole record on a variable length record file into one variable?
And what does Art say?
I'm sorry, I lost power, then I lost internet. I missed a lot of the conversation. What do you mean by whole record?
So he has a fixed file, right?
Okay.
Each record is a variable length.
Okay, but it's a fixed file?
Yeah, it's text.
All right.
And the line
He wants
lengths
to do
apparently are variable.
Yes, he wants to do a dash read into one variable to get the whole row.
If I remember correctly, and again, I've been out of this for a couple of years, when you do the file def for a dash read, give it a LRECL and a record format of F. That sets the buffer, but it'll only read till the end of record. So so you make it a big LRECL, and it'll only take as much of the record as it finds.
So you take the max, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you LRECL it with a record format of F, let's say you have 1,000.
Right.
And you only have 100 bytes, it'll only read 100 bytes because that's the end of the record. It'll put it into that 1,000 byte record, and then you can truncate it however you want with it.
That's great. That's true. But the file def has to include the LRECL and the RecFM, right?
F. I'm not sure if FM does it, just F on Unix and PC.
Well, RecFM is that's RecFM is the name. RecFM equals F.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah. And LRECL equals max.
Right.
Yeah, cool. All right, folks.
All right, I think it's a wrap.
I think we're a wrap.
Congratulations, Walter.
Well,
Enjoy
thank you,
your
Arthur.
enjoy your retirement.
I will.
And you, Walter, enjoy your new job.
Yeah.
Gee,
All right.
thanks.
All right, folks. Take care.